So good morning and thank you for attending this collaborative self and custom build webinar today. Our role at the Hampshire Homes Hub is to help communities develop their ideas for meeting local housing needs and to bring these ideas to fruition. We help deliver a variety of community-led housing schemes across Hampshire in both urban and rural areas through a variety of models, including housing cooperatives, community land trusts, co-housing schemes and group self and custom build housing, as well as rural affordable housing on rural exception sites partnering with a housing association. Next slide, if possible, Max.
Right.
Oh, it's the agenda that I need, sorry. It's
Okay.
that one there. Perfect, thank you. So before we get started, I'll just go through the agenda for the morning. I'll first give a brief presentation about collaborative self and custom build housing, as I'm doing now. We will then hear from Hugo Davies from Broadhempston Self-Build Community Land Trust, who will talk about the homes they have built. Tom McSherry from the Buildstore will also then give a talk about finance for self and custom build projects. And then Adam Broadway is coming along from the Right to Build Task Force, who will provide advice and information about how local authorities and partners can support self and custom build. You'll then be given an opportunity to ask questions to speakers at the end of each presentation. We aim to wrap up by 1 p.m. Next slide, if possible, Max. Great, thank you. So have you ever considered building your own home? Self and custom build is basically what it says on the tin. But there are many different types of projects, including spade in the ground, where you do the whole build yourself, and partial build, where a contractor builds the shell and you then finish off the build. There are also many projects supporting self and custom builders to learn the skills they need. Next slide, please. Thank you. Sure, you can embark on a grand designs type project with all the bells and whistles, but you can also do self and custom build on a budget. There are current and completed affordable self-build projects across the country, including Petersfield Community Land Trust in East Hampshire and Newton Close in Bicester. While grand designs makes good telly, real life self and custom build projects can actually be more straightforward. Anyone can get involved in self and custom build, from people with an interest and experience in construction, design and architecture, to those with no experience at all, keen to learn new skills, or those who want to be involved in the design of their home and then commission a builder to complete the build. Next slide, please. Thank you. Collaborative self and custom build is where a group of people join forces to build homes together on a larger site. By building together, the group can share costs and support each other. Embarking on a group self and custom build project is a great way to build a home with additional savings achieved by working together as a group, and it's one of the lowest cost routes to self and custom build. Group self and custom build is a great option as it typically saves you 40% on plot costs and 10% on build costs. We at the Hampshire Homes Hub can help you put you in touch with people in your area who are also keen to self and custom build, and then we can help you form a group and then support the group through the process of building your own homes, like identifying a site and trying to get support for a scheme from the community in which the site's built. Next slide, please, thank you. A group self and custom build project can take many forms. Projects can be led by those who live in the homes themselves, or they could be set up by a wider community organisation which provides an opportunity for local people to build their own homes, for example, through a community land trust, or it could be part of a partnership, for example, with a housing association where residents self-finish their homes. Groups can also choose how they want to work together. For example, the group could find and purchase the site and then design and build their homes together, or the group could identify or purchase a site and individual self-builders could then purchase their plot and build their own home as part of the larger site, perhaps using the design code created by the group. Next slide, please. A group self and custom build project can still enable you to build a home that you want, but it also gives you the opportunity to work with others and build a community in the process. Finding the right site for your home is not always easy, but group self and custom build can in fact make site identification easier by purchasing a larger or trickier site together. As part of the support we offer to self and custom build groups, we at the Hampshire Homes Hub are here to help you find a site. Next slide, please. So I'm now just going to talk about Bunker Co-op in Brighton. Bunker Co-op in Brighton is an example of a collaborative self and custom build housing scheme, and was originally set up by two families on modest incomes interested in building affordable homes for themselves. The Co-op's first scheme at Plumpton Road consists of 2 3-bed homes made available at an affordable rent through the Co-op. These sustainable self-build homes were built using a modular building technique, with the panels manufactured off-site and assembled on-site. Bunker Co-op has now expanded to help others, and they are currently rolling out their tried and tested model and developing in other sites in the city. Bunker members are low-income, mostly self-employed people in Brighton and Hove, many of which are ineligible for council housing registers to join the council housing register and are renting privately. Bunker is now on its 4th scheme, and all 4 sites have been local authority owned and infill sites. The Co-op owns the houses on sites leased by the council for a period of approximately 250 years. All residents are members of the Co-op, and both landlords and tenants, and all the homes built through Bunker Co-op are available for affordable rent. Bunker Co-op is a success for a variety of reasons. The Co-op model and legal structure allows Bunker to borrow money. The Plumpton Road scheme entered planning in 2016 and actually achieved planning in 2017. This quick turnaround was partly due to the group consulting locally, engaging with residents associations and receiving support from the council's estate regeneration team. Bunker has said that their vision would have been impossible without the support from Brighton and Hove Estate Regeneration Team, Brighton City Council, Brighton and Hove Community Land Trust, and other organisations on the project team. Self-build helps the group to charge genuinely affordable rent as self-build cuts out the middleman. The group accessed some community housing fund for their first scheme at Plumpton Road, which paid for a project manager who was able to drive the project forward. Next slide, thank you. So now we're just going to talk about Lancaster Co-housing, which is another case study. Self and custom build gives you the chance to help tackle climate change, as you can choose to build your home through using 2 challenging environmental standards. Environmentally friendly construction materials will also save you money in the long run. This is what Lancaster Co-housing have done. Lancaster Co-housing provided 41 zero-carbon homes for leasehold sale to members of the co-housing group. The homes were designed by the group through a series of workshops with their chosen architect, and the future sales will be available at open market value. The community bought the site back in 2009 and finished the collaborative design in 2010 and gained planning permission and appointed a building contractor in 2011. The homes were completed between 2012 and 2013, and they moved in stages as each terrace was finished. The group are set up as a company limited by guarantee, and the scheme was funded through a mix of member finance and commercial loans, with individual mortgages provided by Ecology Building Society. The co-housing scheme includes a common house with communal facilities, shared workshops and an outdoor space, and the group also have a car club and a cooperative food store. Their chosen contractor carried out the main construction work, with residents being involved in project management and site preparation and landscaping. Next slide, please. So I want to find out more. We at the Hampshire Homes Hub are here to help provide the homes needed in local communities. Please do get in touch with us to find out more about group self and custom build and other types of community-led housing that we are able to support. And just the last slide. So thank you so much for listening to me. Hugo Davies from Broadhempston Self-Build Community Land Trust is now going to be giving a talk about his scheme.
Okay, so thanks for having me here. I'm a member of Broadhempston Community Land Trust, which is in South Devon. We formed our community land trust, I think, in 2016. I was one of the first to join the group, so was there all the way through all the stages. And it's a self-build project, so we saved a lot of money on the house build cost, and then I live there, so I sort of know what it's like to live in the community. And I worked for the architecture company who did the design as well, so I was sort of familiar with the process from that side of things. So what is our CLT? It's a community-led housing development of 6 houses, and we chose 6 because of a housing needs survey in the village. And that was what the response was. They're tied affordable, so they're tied to a section 106, which restricts their value when it comes to sale. So ours are just 80% of open market value. There's other things which the CLT owns 25% of the houses in perpetuity, so the owner can't sell them on and take all the money. The CLT retains some of the value. The project main aim is to provide local housing for local people to stay in the village. So it's been a real success in that, letting families stay close to their families, their parents and things. Otherwise, they'd have to move out of the village, which is great for bringing up children and families staying together. It actually started with a small social enterprise which wanted to make a business out of facilitating these projects. They were familiar with the model and advertised the idea to the village, and we just met in a village hall, and they presented the idea to us. And they then helped us get the ball rolling, really. So they helped us set up a CLT. They helped us find a site, which is basically just asking people. We just asked farmers, asked friends and family, do you know anyone with a field or with a patch of land? And we then had discussions with the council. They helped us get pre-development funding to help pay for some initial designs, maybe a site survey. There's maybe some talks with the solicitor, and employ an architect, and eventually get planning permission using the architect. So to get going, it needed some support from the parish council. It needed local authority support. It needed some initial pre-development funding to pay for all the design work, surveys and things that you need for a planning application. It needed a lot of volunteer time and energy, and that's generally speaking for a CLT, in my experience. It needed help once it got going. Once we got building, it needed help and generosity from local suppliers. We had quite a lot of help from a window company who came to give us a little training day to explaining how to put in a window, and we helped contractors, and contractors helped us. So a lot of understanding of what the project was, and generosity from both sides. The design vision, because it's self-build, but also had to be affordable, there was a time constraints, there were budget limits. The design had to be, and other aspirations like being ecological. So once it's finished, it needed to be cheap to run, low heating costs. All these things led to a design that was had a simple traditional concrete floor, and then a timber prefabricated frame, like you can see in the picture. These are timber panels that come on a lorry and are lifted into place with the crane and they're nailed together. And that gives you your shell for the house, which can then be fitted out by the self-builders. That gives a really quick construction method. One house can take, well, probably 2 weeks to get shell in place. So all 6 houses, the whole process took a year and a half to build the 6 houses. And then so the self-builders can then fit out the frame. So here's this is quite advanced, but from the shell, the self-builders would have put all the battens on, and then the cladding or the roofing, put all the roofing on, or cladding there. Back a bit, but here you can see a section view and drawings of the house. So it has this large sun space on the front, which absorbs all the heat, gets really hot and helps to heat the whole house. So heat rises up there and enters the top rooms. But as it rises, it draws air around the house to naturally heat and ventilate the house. And then the walls are made of timber frame, but insulated with straw bale. So they're nice and thick and low heating bills. And here you can see in the background, there's a timber frame filled with mineral wool insulation in between the studs. But then the straw bale in front, which stack up. And on the left, you can see the straw bale being rendered. That's getting its first coat of plaster, which gets splattered in with a plaster gun. And then its second coat up here is a nice smooth coat, which gets a lime wash. And you have these lovely soft window reveals where it's curved around the windows. So challenges that the project overcome. Well, the first was planning permission. Here's Broadhempston, aerial view of Broadhempston. And our site is on the outskirts, which normally you wouldn't get planning permission for any houses up there because it's outside of the village boundary or village development area. But because it's purely for affordable housing, we were granted permission, but with a sale restriction that's documented in a section 106. And if you don't understand what that is, please ask. But it puts in writing lots of terms and agreements about who can live there and how it can be sold. So that is a way of getting permission on land that wouldn't necessarily normally. But also it's key to getting more affordable land, because any land that's allocated for development would be a lot more expensive. Whereas ours, the sale is restricted to £10,000 a plot, plus the service infrastructure installation cost. Other challenges were sewage connection. Well, mainly all the services actually, because it was quite far away from the village. Services were far away, and that's the downside of these exception sites. So it was too expensive to connect to the main sewage connection, which was way down the road. So we overcame that with a on-site treatment plant. These are just general diagrams, not related to ours, but here you can see that it's just an independent sewage treatment plant. Sewage comes into the system and it naturally breaks down all the sewage and releases cleanish water into a ditch or a stream. Surface rainwater. This is more and more encouraged by the Environment Agency to be separated from the sewage system so it doesn't overwhelm the sewage system. So our system for dealing with rainwater is really simple and actually gives a really lovely asset to the site, and that's called a swale. It's just a ditch really, with dams in, where all the gutters run into the ditch, and in a storm or heavy rain, the dams fill up so create these sort of temporary ponds, and you can plant this ditch with plants, and it's a great wildlife biodiversity asset as well. Really simple, really cheap, becoming a lot more popular in developments. And then mains water connection was also really expensive, so we ended up going for a borehole, which is a gamble, because no one can guarantee after digging the borehole your water's going to be reliable. So you have a dowser that comes along with the dowsing sticks, and says, yep, this is your best chance. So that off you go, putting in your money, and it was okay, but we had problems for years actually, and now we've managed to borrow some more money to connect to the mains. So if you can, get your reliable water source sorted before it's too late. Funding. There are lots of sources of pre-development funding, grants and loans available. CAF Venturesome gave us our pre-development funding, and Resonance gave us the main source of funding for the bulk of the project. But to get that main funding, we did rely heavily on an accountant who was also a financial director, our director on the CLT, and he created a business plan which the bank relied on heavily. So that's a key thing for getting the project going, is having a solid business plan that that the funders can understand and make sense to them. We were lucky that we knew someone and was on the board of directors. But yeah, I'd imagine that any other CLTs would need that definitely, and might be worth paying for to employ them. But it's understanding the technical or complicated rental system of a CLT is that's something to get their head around. The acceptance of straw bale, that was okay, but it's quite an unconventional building material. And there took a bit of getting used to the idea, but on the whole it was okay. The architect provided a warranty. The self-build element was fairly tricky from a warranty perspective because of quality assurance, but yeah, the architect provided the warranty there, so that satisfied the funders. Novice builders building homes that a bank is paying for. You can imagine a bank wants the houses to be sound. So how do you get builders, novice builders, to know what to do? Well, we actually had a builder working with us, and he would train us every week on every task that came along. So we and because the houses were the same, we'd learn one task once and then repeat it 6 times. So that's the benefit of having the same design of house. It's far less complicated. And that's actually all my slides. So feel free to ask any questions. I hope I've prompted some things there. There's so many aspects to talk about.
Thank you very much, Hugo. That was great, and I'm particularly interested in what you were saying about. I liked what you were saying about how you repeated the process to make sure for your learning. I mean, that sounds like an ideal opportunity for sort of testing things out, and I sort of wonder whether the 6th person's house was always the same, or whether you sort of alternated, so that whether the you know, whether the last house was always the one where everyone had the most experience, or whether that was
yeah, we tended to be the most careful on the first house, and by the 6th house we just wanted to move in.
Okay, so it was the other way off. So it was the other way round.
Yeah, it was a bit, yeah. but it's still standing. It's still there.
Excellent. So we've got a question about how are you heating the domestic hot water?
Yes, a variety. That was actually up to each household to choose. Ours is electric. We've got some solar panels on the roof, which contributes to which has a gadget sending the electric straight into the hot water tank. But a variety, really. We some have a conventional gas boiler. One person has a back boiler from a wood burning stove. And we just have a pure electric system, so there wasn't any constraints on that. It was up to their own choice because of what people could afford and things.
Thank you. And another question about how much did each householder have to invest in order to purchase the land? So
yeah, so actually that was the great thing, and the great thing about the model.
So about the sort of sweat equity model rather than actually a sort of purchase.
Yeah, that's the great thing about the model, is that you're financially protected really from any lending of any of your own money. The CLT as a company borrows the money to buy the land, and then once you move in, you pay your rent. It's a rent to buy scheme really, and then that rent helps pay off the loan. So the process was get planning permission for the project on the land, and then buy the land with borrowed money, and then start building. Yeah.
Thank you. I've got a question about were there any insurance problems with having straw bale insulation and timber construction?
No. The CLT has insurance for the homes, and we all have contents insurance for the homes, and that's been pretty fine. It's not too unconventional. It was it's been fine.
So we did also have a question about section 106, which one of our other panelists has answered sort of from a legal point of view, but I wondered if there was anything else specific that you wanted to add about the section one, about your specific section 106.
What would you like to know? I mean,
no, that's fine. If there,
yeah,
that's fine. We've got another question. Would rainwater harvesting for supply have been an option?
For supply of
yeah, so I presume sort of flushing
yes.
toilets, that sort of.
Oh right, yeah. It was initially, it was costed out, and then through contact we did install our own systems. So we have sort of, as an afterthought, we have installed some rainwater harvesting, but initially, yeah, it was costed out for money saving.
And then we've got a question about, so that says, do councils have a preference for developing brownfield sites as opposed to greenfield? Well, I mean, in this case, you developed on a rural exception site, yeah, where that has to be on land outside of a settlement boundary, which does tend to be the greenfield site. So that was the specific circumstances of this development.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. I don't know if they've got a preference. Yeah, and I know there's a bit of debate around the pros and cons of, ecologically speaking, green and brownfield sites, but that's a whole new debate.
Got a question about how do you fix things to the walls using the hay bale insulation?
Yeah, you can't really. It's a bit difficult. There's some battens in the straw bale walls as you layer up the bales. So if you and you know if they're above the window, but generally you can't really fix to the straw bale walls. You can fix to the stud walls. You can hang pictures. The lime render's thick enough to hang pictures, but otherwise freestanding furniture or to the stud walls. Yeah. But it doesn't limit us really. There's plenty of shelves around them.
Yeah, I mean that's an interesting question.
Yeah.
So I've got a question. So yeah, that's another question asking about kind of capital, but obviously, but you've answered that in terms of that wasn't the model. The CLT obviously was the vehicle for purchasing and then borrowing.
Yeah.
Bev, Tom McSherry's got his hand up.
Okay. Sorry, Tom.
Hugo, that was fabulously educational for me, and thank you. See, on the CLT borrowing initially, the commercial element, did the commercial lender fund it 100%, or was there some capital required for the purchase?
No, 100%.
That's outstanding. Yeah, I'd like to follow up with that, because that's a challenge that many people face.
Yeah, I know. I don't know if we were unique and very lucky, but yeah, they're happy to do that.
Yeah, super. It's good to know.
Got a question which I think is perhaps about how long the building took from start to finish.
Yeah, about 1.5 years. It was pretty quick. It took about 5 years to plan, and then once we got going, it was fine.
Wow, excellent. And then a question about, just someone asking, can you tell us a bit more about obtaining planning permission on the land? And did you know that you would be able to get planning permission before you bought the land?
No, we bought the land after getting planning permission. That's perfectly normal. So I can't remember if we had a pre-application or not, but now I definitely advise. We're going through a similar process because we want to build 2 new houses on the site. So I'm going through that process now, and basically, discuss the project with your council and develop a relationship with them. And now I'm ensuring that the design is affordable to construct, because they're self-build homes as well. So there's a sort of cost analysis about how much the houses might cost to build. A pre-application before planning to sound out the application with the planners. Basically, you need to do as much research and work to ensure that you will get planning, and that what you're going to get permission for is affordable and within budget and all that. So I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, so did the local authority have a rural exception site policy, and were they sort of flexible on what type of affordable housing could be provided? Obviously they approved your scheme, but I just wondered whether they had a particular rural exception site policy that are sort of allowed for self-build as an option for the affordable housing.
I don't know, but I imagine, I mean, there's an exception site policy in the national planning policy framework. So that gives the foundations, the basis for a policy, I guess. So I imagine they just followed that. I don't actually know, to be honest, what
that's
it was. Yeah.
That's okay. And another question was ground source heat. Were ground source heat pumps considered for the development?
Yeah, we did look into a community heating scheme, a communal heating scheme, but it just costs too much to put in. The capital you need to put it in is too much for us. It would have been great. We looked at a ground source heat pump, and we looked at air source heat pumps as well, individual air source heat pumps, but they were too expensive. We had a budget of 5 grand each per house for a heating system. A air source heating system I think was coming out at about 13 grand per house. So we just couldn't afford it. So we went for more. Most of us went for more conventional, and we just went for the electric.
Thank you.
System.
So they had a question about how much choice the self-builders had about the finish of their house, and obviously you talked about having a sort of fairly similar process that you could go through, so each of the houses that you were able to practice on, was there sort of much flexibility at all in terms of the finish of the homes, or was it, or are they all pretty much identical?
Yeah, no, there's two layouts. There's a 3-bed and a 4-bed, and that naturally gives a completely different feel to the spaces. And as it and then to finish it, for the finishes, actually three of the houses actually decided that they didn't want to. The lime render is quite time consuming and expensive and labor intensive. So actually some of the houses decided to not do that and put a metal frame against the straw bales with normal plasterboard and just plaster that. So they just have square edged walls. And then, well, in terms, yeah, most of it, so either really it's either a lime washed plaster wall and a square edged white plaster wall. There was some tweaks to the layout otherwise, but they naturally do just feel very different because of people's tastes and styles.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, no, I'm sure they're quite different internally.
Yeah.
And follow up.
Oh, sorry, did you mean the external?
Yeah, no, I think it was. It doesn't. It's not clear.
The external is pretty defined at planning stage.
Yeah,
so,
yeah. So I mean, that's, and obviously you part of the way in which you're building it is that you are replicating.
Yeah.
That same.
Yeah, we can paint our houses different colours.
Yeah. Yes. And then there's a question about, if you don't mind answering, what sort of rent that is.
Yeah. I think we're paying about £800 a month, plus rent, maintenance. We have a maintenance fee for the biodigester and things like that. So I think it's total about £900 a month.
And then in terms of the buy to rent model, sort of what proportion of that is sort of going towards sort of incrementally increasing your share, as it were? Yeah,
a good question, and I'll find that out if I can before we finish.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's not a lot, but I can find out.
Yeah, no, I think, because I thought it was, yeah, I think it's quite a sort of small percentage, but obviously that makes it more affordable as well.
Yeah.
So question about what's the expected life of a house built using these materials? So I assume that's how long is the building expected to last?
Yeah, I mean, as long as it's, I don't know if there's a figure put to it, but as long as it's maintained and the straw doesn't get damp and the timber doesn't get damp, it can last indefinitely, I suppose. I mean, it just needs to be kept dry, and that's hopefully what it is. And that's the main thing about breathable materials with straw bales and timber. They need the moisture to be able to be you need to breathe,
yeah,
so that the moisture doesn't get trapped.
And then we have a question about the final cost approximately for each property. I presume that's the build cost, I presume. Yeah,
the build cost. Let me just get back to you on that if I can.
Yeah, no, of course.
I just need to look it up again.
And then a question about what sort of electric heating, and is it costly to run?
We all have underfloor heating in the floors, ground floor. I think the cost of it varies depending on your heating system. So those with gas might be a bit more expensive this winter because of the gas. We've got electric. We don't actually turn ours on because we found it to be actually too expensive and unnecessary, really. We were just happy with it off. But I mean, our electricity bill, we don't have any heating, but it's about £70 a month.
Wow.
So I don't know how that compares with anyone, but But there's only 2 of us and a small child working from home. So yeah.
But you're not finding that you're needing the heating, obviously. So
No. We have a wood burner. We put that on over winter. We have a oil freestanding heater. But other than that, we don't have any. We have towel rails, and they're electric, as in heated by electric water. Yeah.
And we've got a question about demonstrating community support to the council and whether that was a requirement of the planning policy. So it says, so how did you demonstrate community support in order, because often in a rural exception site policy, there is, an element of community support as part of the policy.
Yeah, so we needed the parish council support. We did presentations to the parish council, to explain to them what it was about. I think it generally got public community support because it was a sort of homegrown scheme, and also probably because it wasn't in anyone's backyard. I think that does help. People are wary of development generally, especially if it's close to their house. So this being on the edge of the village, that and combined with it's for local people, it's affordable, and so on. That did give it a good chance.
Yeah, so we've got a sort of related question, sort of which is asking, what do you do if the parish council's not in agreement? And it's, yeah, I mean, rural exception policies do tend to have that requirement. That's an element of the policy.
Yeah.
I mean, and it says, can local councils override objections from parish councils? I mean, the local authority is the determining planning authority, but certainly, like you were saying, it's helpful to make those presentations to the parish council and to get that community to support, wider community support, sort of within the community as well as the parish council as well.
What would you do? Well, I mean, I guess work with them really to see if they've got a sort of criteria that they want to meet, or what are the issues that they don't like. Are there visual? Do they not like the design visually? Do they not like the number of the houses? Or I think if you're you need to work collaboratively with them and come to some sort of agreement or compromise. If you want to achieve your goal of providing houses, some discussions basically.
Yeah, no, I mean, and the question does also mention sort of housing needs surveys, and obviously the type of housing that you're providing is quite specific. I mean, and it may be that there are options for doing specific housing needs surveys that relate to the type of housing that the group is providing.
Yes,
So the next question: has anyone moved on, sold their property equity, and if so, when this happens? If and when this happens, how would you find new residents? What is the allocation policy?
Not yet. They haven't moved on yet. Actually, well, a couple might be moving on. So how to find new residents? Word of mouth, advertise it by a estate agent, anything you can really. But the allocation policy is really set down with the section 106. So the various criteria in there are you need to have a connection with the village, and that can be through family or work, and you need to be in need of a house. You can't am I saying all the obvious things?
No, so and all of those will be set out in the section 106 agreement as well, in terms of who the homes are to be sort of allocated.
Which makes it complicated or harder to sell. But
so that I mean, and that obviously contributes to the affordability of it as well. I mean, and that's why they are affordable, because they are restricted, and it's not open market housing. And there's definitely people out there. I mean, the 2 new homes that we're trying to get permission for now, there's we had to advertise that.
sort of soft market testing. And there's 10 people interested. There's definitely, and they have the same criteria, the same Section 106 criteria. So it's definitely people who hopefully fit the bill.
Thank you. I've got one more. Thank you very much. Who designed the style of the housing? It says, did you seek the design on your own or did the council help you? So I presume, because we did talk about pre-app, so I presume there were some initial designs put together and then perhaps sort of seeking some feedback from the council as to how that developed.
Yeah, no, we didn't really. We were given a design really, and were keen to be on the scheme. So the design was developed really by the architect and the social enterprise who started the scheme. That they really took that design to the architect and said, "This is what we like." It's kind of an old principle, having that big glass space on the front, but it works anyway. So yeah, the architect developed the design first, and the council was at the time really keen to support self-build affordable housing. At the time when Grant Shapps was the housing minister.
Yep.
Yeah, so it was hot on the political agenda.
Okay, well, thank you very, very much. That's all our questions. That was a bit of a marathon.
No, that's okay, and I'll try and get back to you on the chat with the answers to those three.
Oh, I do apologise. We've just got one quick other question.
Yeah.
So just about how the social enterprise was set up and who set it up. So I presume that then became the CLT.
Yeah, so, well, actually, no, so I haven't explained fully that, but it's because the social enterprise started and wanted to make a business out of it. But it turned out that they weren't really experienced enough, and they didn't work out in the end, and they stopped. They ceased trading, or whatever you want to say, after planning, and we found that they weren't really competent in the end. So we left them, and they've since diminished. Yeah. But they were but in principle, they were really necessary to get the ball rolling, because they brought the scheme to us and they showed us the first steps. And so in sort of model terms, I think that's really essential for any project to have that sort of facilitation to get going.
Yeah, at that sort of early stages to sort of bring everything together.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, thank you ever so much. So that's the end of our questions. And we'll just take a quick sort of 5-minute comfort break, and then we'll start again with our next speaker at 5 to 11, which is Tom McSherry from the Buildstore. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you, first of all, for joining us. And I thought that was quite a inspirational talk from Hugo, and very much around the whole CLT process, and lots about materials and the palette of materials, the superstructure, the legals, all really important and points that I'll touch on. I'm probably going to widen this talk out further because we'll, in terms of the audience, not sure whether we're many self-builders, custom builders, or groups. And it was interesting listening to the involvement, because if you look at self-build, which is a spectrum of everything from appointing a main contractor to actually believing that we can construct the house ourselves, it's and everything in between. Well, the custom build model and the custom build model and the group build model is exactly the same, but there'll be an involvement of professionals and individuals at various stages. But there's some core principles that carry out throughout the process. And if you're an individual self-build like I am, working from home, this is the house we built a number of years ago, then there is a well-established group of lenders who support self-build as a community. When we're working with groups or multiple plot developments, as volume house builders create multiple plot units, there's a far more detailed strategy that needs to take place from the outset, and I'll touch on that. There is no doubt, and we're in a fairly unprecedented time period just now in terms of, Hugo mentioned the gas costs increasing, but that's one of many things with timber having gone up by 70% this year, very difficult to source chipboard, plasterboard, and general increase in materials. So setting the budget's incredibly critical, and I would implore anyone who's about to embark on a project, whether it's individual or group, that budget becomes the starting point rather than the architect becoming the starting point, because too often we're presented with stunning projects, but the budget hasn't been established first, and there's a reverse engineering then takes place, which makes an interesting TV programme, but it's not the type of project you want to be involved in yourself. Setting the budget at the start is key, and of course sharing that budget with the architect, because it then gives them the parameters to work within. Looking at working out your costs, because the projects bring with them additional costs, but equally I'll touch on the additional benefits. The single most important thing in any project is cash flow, and we'll talk about what cash flow is, but it should sit at the forefront of everything that you do. It's not sufficient to know that you have borrowed enough money to complete a project. You need to understand when the money arrives on site, because there's a group of professionals, suppliers, tradespeople that need to be paid. And some of you today might be those professionals who unfortunately spend your life chasing money, having carried out work. So we'll talk about the cash flow and how over the last 20 odd years Buildstore has gone about creating many of the solutions for that. Looking at stage payment mortgages, how do they work? Because you're not receiving a single loan on day one to purchase a house under the traditional vanilla route of buying a property. So we'll look at how those mortgages differ and the key to successful projects. And Hugo made some really important points around, particularly, you have to be determined to do this. It's not just been handed a set of keys. There's a planning process to go through. With the shared ownership, the groups, cooperative schemes, the legals are quite detailed and challenging. The individual process is far more commonplace, and we'll touch on some of the key things to focus on, and indeed that journey that we support our customers with. I mentioned multiple plot sites. I don't think we've ever been in a more exciting time in the self and custom build sector, and Hugo had mentioned Grant Shapps, who at one time shadowed housing minister and usually became housing minister and started much of the momentum that was then taken on by Richard Bacon. And Richard brought forward the Self-Build and Custom House Building Act 2015. It was updated in October 2016. And what we've now got is the right to build legislation in England. I'm extremely envious of it because it's something that we don't have across the line in Scotland. Now, what you have is every local authority in England has a register that each of you you're able to add your name to. And there is then a commitment required from the local authority to commission sufficient planning permissions to meet the demand in the register. And that maybe Hugo had mentioned how helpful the local authority were. I think these registers play a large part in that because there is a need to meet demand. When we do have a multiple plot site, then very quickly, one of the first sites was a site in Warrington called Frenchfields, where the lenders had identified as the scheme developed that they had already lent on one plot and we were bringing another plot to them. What they wanted to do was have an approved panel on the development right at the start before the scheme goes live. And as part of the journey when bringing multiple schemes forward, I think what I'm really saying today is embrace the financial part along with the planning and the architect and the legals, because that structure needs to be detailed at an early stage. And the lenders want extensive knowledge of the project, and that includes the legal process. It includes the superstructure being used. More importantly, the panel of materials, the palette of materials that will wrap the outside of the building. So really important at the outset that we create a structured approach and we go out to the lenders and bring together an agreed panel. There's no secret to the support that is played to by regional building societies. The clue's in the name, of course. You would waste a lot of time and energy going through the high street banks who don't quite understand this sector fully. They probably don't see it as a big enough sector for them to be involved in. But what we do have is outstanding support from regional building societies who continue to be supportive as we develop, moving out of self-build and increasing the enabled route through groups and custom build. Each scheme will have a bespoke set of solutions depending on the delivery method and the cash flow requirements, factors including the site ownership, the overall master plan. Will that involve individual plots? Is it a mixture of plots, terraced and apartments as we have in a scheme in Bristol? The house types, the palette as I discussed, and the construction and delivery method. You've just, obviously Hugo's team were very much heavily involved themselves in gaining the benefit from that labour that they put in themselves. But it's not every scheme that does that. And group schemes and custom schemes, multiple plot developments can have a range of delivery from, as was mentioned, excuse me, early on with Catherine, that it could be plots, it can be, which will be serviced, it could be plots to golden brick, a la Graven Hill, where the foundations are already installed for you for the house that you've designed. It could be a shell and core, where there's allowing you the time to finish the project, or it could be a main contractor where you have a design and build contract, but you have an involvement in the design of the house. So these things are particularly important, and equally as the legal structure, because the lenders want to know, in worst case scenario, in the point of if there's ever a repossession, what does the legal structure, and the 106 is a good point, who can they sell the property onto? Some examples, part of our group, Custom Build Homes, an enabling partner, have been working with councils, local authorities, private landowners, bringing forward schemes. This is Lowfield Green, York Council brought forward this multiple plot development, which has some commercial element, rental, your space, the community scheme, and a self-build. So a real mixed tenure development, which has been, was literally sold out in the day that it was taken to the market. Huge demand for the development. Bear with me to bring back up my, can you see my presentation?
Yes, because
Still see it. It's gone back. Another council, Durham, brought forward a scheme where they've, it was an old school that was demolished in the outskirts of Durham. They put in the roads and services, outline planning permission, and giving the individuals the opportunity to design and commission their own home. We mentioned that shell and core option. This is a scheme that's been brought forward in the outskirts of Edinburgh, and you can see there's a real common theme to the external layout of the house. One of the questions that Hugo had was, what choice do people have? Well, of course, the inside of our house can look very different itself. These houses have been engineered, which will be a closed panel or SIP system, where it can be configured in excess of 30 different ways by way of the layout of the property, whether it's compartmentalized, open plan, upstairs living, downstairs living, etc. And that's been, again, incredibly well received by the local authorities. So just giving you a flavour for the different types of scheme that can be brought forward.
Sorry, Tom. So just had a couple of questions. So we could see the links, but we couldn't see anything. We couldn't see anything further.
Let me just see, because I'm splitting the screen.
We could see the links that you were showing, but we couldn't see the.
Let me just see how I can put it across to both screens. Let me see if this works. Is that now coming through? Can you see it now?
I can still see just your page with the 3 links on.
Okay. This is a technology challenge from my point of view because I can see it here. It might be worthwhile, anyone that wants the details of the links, I can provide them to them. But it's difficult for me. It's on a screen share.
No, completely understand. Thank you ever so much, Tom. Yeah, we can share those links with attendees.
Back to the agenda. Whether you're a self-builder, custom builder, part of a group, I mentioned, of course, the need to set your budget. If you have to borrow, of course, many people don't, but if you have to borrow, setting the budget pre-design is critical. Please don't set off with an architect and come up with a fabulous design to work out you can't afford to build it, and then you have to pay to have it redesigned. And it's not a complex process. I mean, for the last 22 years, Buildstore have been supporting the industry and have a structure where we can engage with it. Our customer engagement can be anywhere between 3 months to 3 years, as we often, for many people, are setting the budget to allow them to go and find and secure land and moving beyond through construction. But it's not difficult to do, and it's a mixture of your liquid savings that you're bringing to the project and how much any lending institution can allow you to borrow. There, of course, can be considerable equity wrapped up in a current home. I'll come on to discuss that separately because it can be released through remortgage. There can be a short-term solution where we can use the equity. But in general terms, the lenders that support the sector, if someone's buying a plot to engage in a project, on day one, their borrowed funds plus your liquid funds that you have available need to cover the total project. That's land and build. Or if you're joined us today and you already own the plot, you can borrow 100% of your build costs. What has been interesting, and I did say that this is an incredibly exciting time for the sector, both from a legislation perspective, but from a financial point of view. Buildstore over 20 years ago designed products to unlock this for more people to do. It shouldn't just be for the wealthy. And my house is quite a modest design, and it was designed with budget in mind. It doesn't have to be grand designs. So you can build your own home on a relatively tight budget. But from a lending point of view, we were able to expand lenders who typically wouldn't lend on land to then all lending on land and build, and moving them from typically 75% of the cost of the project up to 95% of the cost of the project. So already we have a market where, you know, we should be able to change the demographics and bring first-time buyers to the community. And of course, what's been going on behind the scenes, probably a journey of in excess of 5 years, really came to light. And the Conservative manifesto last Christmas highlighted that they were going to open up the Help to Buy scheme for the self and custom build community. So that 20% equity loan scheme that has in many ways given a leg up to lots of first-time buyers moving into owning their first home has been extended into the self and custom build community, and that's been mapped out at the moment. It was confirmed in the most recent spending review, excuse me, and we're working with our lenders now to bring that lending up to 95% as a wider range of products, with the equity loan scheme being available as well. So watch this space. That's a really important piece of legislation and opportunity that Homes England will bring forward with us. But of course, it is a mortgage, and a mortgage requires affordability. No different to any traditional mortgage. It's about your income, your outgoing, employment status, and your credit history. I think it's really important for people to understand. There's, I listened to a podcast recently about milestones in the construction process, which there are, which is the land, damp-proof course, wind and watertight, first fix and plaster, second fix and completion. but it was quite interesting because in my experience, every day was a pay away day. Because if I'm not paying for my superstructure, I'm paying contractors, which were weekly, or going to the builder's merchant to ensure that materials were available at the time. But those payaways include the securing the purchase of the land. You need to understand the fee structure. And the fee structures will be, of course, you're going to have stamp duty, which of course major benefit is on the purchase of the land only, not the end value of the project. So that's important. Excuse me, just going to close something. So stamp duty is based on the land purchase, not the end value, so there's a huge saving. But you'll have legal fees, valuation fees. In addition to that, you'll have potential planning fees or detailed planning, your building regulations, site insurance and structural warranty. So there's additional costs. So we set that budget at an early stage. We take some of it away because we need to ensure that we're covering the professional fees that are before we break the soil. We've then got build costs, and understanding the costs of material and labour. And of course, at the moment, you'll see further down here that I'm highlighting the importance of contingency, which would normally have been historically around 10% of the project. More recently, we're asking people to consider looking at a higher contingency because, again, we're in fairly uncharted waters with the perfect storm that's in the background causing shortages in materials and increasing the costs of professionals. The delivery method is really important because that will dictate when you need funds and what that payment schedule will be, as will the materials that you use. If it's a traditional brick and block, there's more of an even increment up through the build process. But if we're working, as mentioned earlier in the previous presentation, working with off-site manufacturing, which many self-builders do, and whether that's timber frame, SIPs, ICF, oak, there's a wide range, and again, to dispel the myth, all of the lenders are supportive of these off-site manufacturing systems. We'll come on to the pallet that we wrap the building in, which is probably more of a greater level of interest to them. But something that is unique working with off-site manufacturing is the vast majority of the suppliers want paid before it leaves the factory, because you've just designed a bespoke home that doesn't fit on anyone else's plot. As a result, it's no use to the supplier for any other customer. So you're paying for it up front. That means you've just front-end loaded your cash flow, because the superstructure with a package supplier could include doors and windows, a considerable amount of the finishes internally as well. If that's all been paid before it leaves the factory, we need to consider that as part of our costs. And we also need to look at, from a mortgage point of view, where will you live during the build? If you have an existing mortgage and you want to stay in your current home, you are allowed to have two mortgages at the same time, one of them being your current mortgage and your main residence, the other being your self or custom build mortgage, until that property is complete when you sell your current home. When, of course, there will be no capital gains tax, even though you've moved into your new home. But if that monthly mortgage commitment that you have, the monthly payment will act as a reduction in terms of what you can borrow. As with any personal loan, it's the monthly payment that's used just in an affordability calculation model, rather than netting off the existing mortgage balance. So if your income allows you to borrow 300 and you've already got 200, it's not that you can only borrow 100. They simply take your monthly payment and use it as an affordability model to see how much you can borrow. Of course, if you're not renting and you don't have a mortgage, then your potential to borrow can increase. And that's why, of course, many people will sell up, move in with family, move on site. They're all ways of reducing your outgoings and therefore increasing your borrowing potential. But to the right-hand side, I think it's fair to say that this is about organising the funding and understanding the costs and coming up with that pot. However, if the right funds aren't available at the right time, then there are without doubt stress and delays. And how do we go about that? How do we solve those issues? So it's solved by the structure of the funding. Commercial lending traditionally provides money after each stage. So there needs to be an element of contribution from the involved parties, whether you're a group or a self-builder or custom builder. Valuation-based lending was how the mortgage market evolved originally with self-build many years ago. And the money's agreed in stages. Typically now up to 85% of the land and build, but as I said, that's about to change with the extension of the Help to Buy scheme, the Help to Build opportunity. And we do have one lender already at 95% of land and build. And that gives you 85% of land to buy the purchase, and to purchase the land, and to construct the property. The key here in terms of valuation based, it's valuation based in arrears. So you fund the stage, and if the value goes up, you get money back. If the value doesn't go up, you don't get money back. Now that's typical at the foundation stage. And if the foundations are complicated on a sloping site, you know, it's not uncommon for 30, 40, 50,000 pounds to be spent, but the value not increase. Now, if the value doesn't increase, there's nothing coming back to you having made that contribution to get to that stage. If you're now working with an offsite manufacturer, of course, you're now having to pay them before it leaves the factory. So again, front end loading and creating a larger need for cash contributions. Now that in many ways was what was restricting the market many years ago. Back 1998, 1999, Buildstore's product development team worked with some lenders and created cost-based lending. And originally the cost-based lending, the product was called the Accelerator Mortgage, very much active today. And the Accelerator Mortgage provides 85 to 95% of the purchase price of the land or plot, and up to 85 to 95% of the build costs. However, guaranteeing the stage payments based on the cost of the project rather than the valuation. So on day one, the valuer tells us the plot value, they'll tell us the end value, and with the build costs provided, we will then simply provide the funds at each stage as the build progresses. Now, in many ways, that's what the product is. What the product does is make you a cash buyer of materials. It enables you to pay for offsite manufacturing at the right time and meet the demands of that payment schedule. It means your contractor, rather than being paid at milestones where they're carrying risk, you could pay them every week. And it means, you know, that demand of every day is a pay away day where you have to go down to builders merchants. If the money for the stage is in the bank account before the stage starts, it delivers that positive cash flow and creates that level of flexibility. Now, ironically, as the change moved from self-build to enabled custom build and custom build as it's expanding, that cost-based lending very recently, we've just created a whole new suite of products which are specifically for custom build, where there's an enabling partner involved. So there may be a contractor who's funding stages, but again, we need the certainty that the contractor is going to be paid. So we evolved a new stage product which is cost-based in arrears. So removing the valuer and that potential risk of the site not valuing. So there's cost-based in arrears and cost-based in advance. And also let me point out that the valuation based in arrears is useful in many instances. We use lots of it. When is it useful? Well, it's useful if you already own the plot, and there may be some of you today who do. And if that site's worth £100,000 and the lender would have given you 85% to buy it, then we're in a position where we can release 85,000 from the land value on day one. That injects the cash flow to put the foundations in, to work with, to pay the superstructure supplier. And if there's some additional cash, then equally that reduces risk. So the scheme works well for when you already own the land or you have a considerable cash contribution. Otherwise, we just remove the risk and move to cost-based lending, either in arrears or advance, depending on the demands of the project. And with that in mind, which one's right for you? Well, every single scheme is different. Whether we're working with cooperatives, CLTs, individuals, custom build, when you move to a multiple plot enabled process, these solutions often don't sit on the shelf. And what we're often doing is working with the group or partners or enablers to go to the lenders to create the solution, because this is still an evolving market in many ways. The self-build market is a well-trodden path, with lenders incredibly supportive, as I've already indicated, but each custom build scheme and group scheme have different makeups and a different structure. The 106s can differ. And what's been quite exciting, we're talking about affordable self-building, and that comes in various guises. We've had a number of councils recently bringing forward using the 106, where they will bring forward a site where an open market plot that would normally have been £100,000 is provided for £10,000 to someone who lives in the local community and works in the local community, and there are rules around that. That means they have more to put towards the build because of smaller deposits, but the property will then be locked in perpetuity, 60–70% of its open market value. So it continues to be an affordable property going forward. And one of the councils in London have just brought forward a scheme that we've been working on for some time, and there was a considerable discount on the plot, which has made it an affordable self-build project. A very similar scheme in Glasgow, where the selection process had that local connection test, had an affordability test, and the final part of the criteria was design focused and environmental focused. So the property should have minimal impact on the environment. Quite a pioneering scheme, and one that worked well and will continue to be rolled out across other sites for the council. So every scheme's different. There's preparatory work required, particularly on group schemes. You need to keep your options open. Buildstore distribute exclusively somewhere around 75% of all of the lenders that lend in this community. Buildstore partner with exclusively with another range of lenders, specialists in this arena that we also work with. Ecology were mentioned earlier, and there's a number of other, Triders Bank, Handels Bank, a wide range of lenders. So it's about keeping your option open. I would say if you're self-building, please engage with a specialist, because this is definitely different to vanilla mortgage lending. It's about tailoring cash flow. It's about understanding the palette of materials. The lenders, post-Grenfell, I think it's fair to say, has had an impact. Whilst it was a report that was focused on multi-storey buildings, I think the ripple has come into most construction arenas, where some of the valuers are pushing for a greater element of masonry. Now, as the self-build community, some of the off-site manufacturers have very little need for bricks and block, because the engineering involved might be that it's simply a render board, brick slips, or a lightweight cladding. Timber cladding is a good example. Cedral, this composite type material that looks like timber but doesn't need maintained. That, I think I'd be a great fan of that one. But the lenders have got very specific criteria around the palette, which is really important. So some of them won't accept timber on timber, and if it exceeds 50% of the external surface of the building. So when should we talk about the finance? Well, at the design phase, because make sure the design isn't minimising the options for finance, because it can have an impact. There was a very good question earlier, you know, how did it affect the insurance element of it? Well, actually, straw bale is a great insulator, but the superstructure was timber frame. It's the insulating factor. What the lenders were probably more interested in is what's on the outside of the building. And quite often what we're doing with the manufacturers is attaining a type approval with the warranty provider before the project's even started to mitigate. I did mention it's great if we can expand the demographics into the first-time buyer market, because I don't see why first-time buyers should be railroaded into buying a house off a volume house builder when they can have a greater level of involvement to design their own home and indeed improve the environmental aspects of it. But equally, we have a retiring market that I'm probably striding towards, where the number of years that I've got left in terms of how long I can take a mortgage over could be restrictive. But many of that marketplace are sitting with in a house that either doesn't have a mortgage, or the house, you know, the house is no longer fit for purpose. It leaks like a sieve and it's expensive to run. And we're about to step into retirement where our income reduces. Well, there's a range of products available to enable people to commission and design and build their own home using the equity within their current home that can be released on a short-term basis. We see it quite often, people splitting the title in their garden of a reasonable sized plot of land, building in the garden, selling the old house and paying it off. Some really important risk notices on it. It's regulated development finance, and as a result, the regulator on that short-term funding only allows the funding to be available for 12 months. So quite clearly, on a 12-18-month project, not suitable unless you have the cash to fund half of it, and you only need it for half of the build programme. Or indeed, if you're working with some of these fantastic off-site manufacturers who might be delivering the property in 6 months, then you've got time to construct, fund, sell the old house and redeem the short-term funding. That particular model doesn't have a need for a mortgage, monthly mortgage payment. It's rolled into the loan facility. I've mentioned the Help to Build scheme, a significant investment of 7.1 billion over the next 4 years. We have never been in a better position as a sector that traditionally just worked off the entrepreneurial individual. This has now got legislation behind it. The Help to Build scheme for self and custom builders and funding for SMEs and modern methods of construction is now a major focus, and we're actively developing and introducing more products and services to the current offering to support the anticipated demand that will come from this. Over 150 million funding to kickstart this self-build revolution. It's really exciting. Our journey at heart, the business was grown as a mortgage brokerage. Much beyond that, we started creating and expanding the group into plot search to help people find land. It's a free facility. That initial advice process, which might often be just budget setting, raising any initial conversations that are required around materials. You know, we see some incredible designs. We're very, very fortunate to see some incredible work done by architects, including some pushing the envelope of materials and design, reducing carbon footprints, zinc, sedum roofs, SIPs, oak frames with SIPs encapsulation systems. Some of the major renovation and conversion projects to queue planning, allowing people to convert agricultural buildings into residential homes. So really exciting times, but that initial stage to tailor the process, holding the customer hand right through this mortgage process to mortgage offer. And that's a detailed process. There are many parts to it in terms of ensuring that it's presented to the lender in its best possible light, and it's tailored to the project. It's about modelling the cash flow for every single project the way that project needs it. There's no one size fits all. During the build for our lending partners, we control the stage release process. We will support the customer through each of those stages, with often the first stage release going to the solicitor, if that's buying the land. or to start the build, and all subsequent releases coming directly to the individual. And of course, having a seat at the table, many of our lenders have a particular rate. You'll see there's no secret of them. And I haven't mentioned them, not that they're not important. As a miserable Scotsman, they are particularly important to me, but what is important is cash flow. But once we've got the cash flow, we then focus on interest rates. But the rates sit between the mid 3% and mid 5%. But all of our lending partners give us a concession of interest only during the build. You're only paying incrementally as you draw the money down in stages. And we've been successful in working with the lenders to either have products that don't have an exit charge, so you can move back to the high street, or those that do have all given us a concession that they will waive their exit penalty and invite you to choose one of their standard residential products on completion of the build. So true flexibility in terms of it, and on an ongoing basis, it's important that we look after our customer for the subsequent mortgages as those needs come along. And that will include us preparing and organising site insurance, structural warranty as part of that journey. To summarise, I can't stress the importance of cash flow, having the money at the right time to ensure that the trades and professionals are paid and you create positive cash flow. That's what removes much of the stress that you will see within the TV programme. You'll hear the phrase, the lender's not providing them with any more money. It's often that there's not more money to get. It's often that the value hasn't increased and therefore it can't be released. But there are solutions now, as I've already described, that can control that and give us cost-based lending. Plan the project around the budget. Don't design the project and reverse engineer to try and fit into a tight budget. Make sure you know your costs. And we do have the ability, where we're securing the land on outline planning with the details still to be scheduled, but sensible build costs can be calculated at an early stage by knowing what you want to do. Going direct to lender gives you one option and it may not be the best one. So, take independent advice. And I would say, particularly this early stages, don't pay for that advice. There's free advice available. Ensuring the site insurance and the structural warranty are prepared in advance. And that's particularly important when we're looking at different delivery methods. So if it's a shell and finish scheme, the developer will take the warranty up to shell and you adopt it and complete the last stage or 2 stages. And as a specialist advisor with over 20 odd years, and I think now we're in excess of 26,000 houses constructed in the UK, there's a Buildstore village somewhere. Self-build, custom build, home improvement, renovation, extending properties. The products that are often described as self-build products are actually stage payment products that can be used for all of those different scenarios. I think that is the core of the presentation, and I'm sure there'll be some questions, if I can just kill that.
Thank you ever so much, Tom. That was really great. I mean, particularly the importance of sort of getting that understanding of the finance at that very, very early stage, and how you're going to be able to sort of make those payments across the build, and sort of including exactly how the build costs and how that's going to work. So we had a question fairly early on in your presentation, which was just about architects working to a budget, and you've really stressed the importance of that, and that you kind of designed the scheme around the budget, and sort of making that work, and the importance of getting finance involved early on, partly for the build cost, but also to ensure that the type of design and the type of materials that you're using are suitable in terms of lending.
Yeah, it's critical, Bev, and I've seen brilliant examples of it working well, and I've seen some fairly catastrophic examples of a 45-degree sloping site, bungalow front, 3-storey at the back, 300 square meters, and the client could afford to borrow about 180,000. It was a scheme that should never been brought forward. The budget was a disaster from the start, and you've got to know when to tell people to stop. Starting with the finance in place and getting that early stage. People often say, but yeah, if I tell the architect my budget, they'll use it all. Yes, that's the idea of it. So but tell them the budget that you're affording. You're not telling them a budget that you can't afford. And working with many architects, simplifying the design, there's value engineering that an architect will work to. You know, a 200 square meter square house will be considerably less expensive than a 200 square meter H-shaped house, simply because of the engineering and the steels and the complication in the roof. There is, you know, there is value in the architect engineering the budget, so it's key.
Thank you. There was a question about, is it possible to get mortgages when a house is built with SIP panels? But I think that you mentioned that towards the end.
Yeah, that's important to dispel that myth. Off-site manufacturing, whether it's open panel timber frame, closed panel timber frame, SIPs, oak, ICF, are widely recognised by our lending panel as fully acceptable. What is important, as I said, what do we wrap the building in? If you want to go SIPs panel, 100% timber cladding, top to bottom, you will dramatically reduce the number of lenders rather than using a carrier render board or using block and render halfway and timber cladding at the top. It's the palette that changes the dynamics of it. What will be key, of course, for the SIPs manufacturers is the payment strategy. They'll want paid before it leaves the factory. Good question.
Thank you. And then we had a question about the decrease in valuation-based stage payments, and who assesses that, and how might you sort of have a projection to understand how this might change so that you can kind of plan for that?
You can't plan for it.
So that's where the contingency comes in.
Well, it's actually why we design cost-based lending. We will, as advisors, be focusing around your specific project. If you own the land, as I said, we can release equity. That helps cash flow. If you've got additional cash, we will work out how far you can get. You know, typically, if you can get to wind and watertight on valuation-based lending, then it's a good position to be able to get to. Prior to that, it can be challenging because the lender will instruct the valuer, who will be independent of the lender, and it's their view what the value is. We don't know what it is at each stage prior to the valuation happening. Therefore, we have an option of cost-based lending, where we simply remove the valuer during the inspection process. They tell us the initial value, they tell us the end value, and they simply come out to do interim inspections rather than valuations to ensure that the build's progressing in a professional manner, as they would expect. But the funds are released based on actual costs at the end of the stage. So if you've spent 20 for the foundations and it's an 85% product, you will get 17,000 back. If it's an advanced stage payment product, you will get 17,000 before the foundations start. So we can control the risk by the choice of product.
Thank you. I had a question about sort of establishing the sort of borrowing part of the budget, and sort of how you can establish that part without the design and architect being involved first, and sort of how, so the lender, so it says that imagine that the lender will need to see evidence of what the build will be worth before agreeing to lend. So again, there's perhaps a sort of dual process going.
Yeah, I mean, the lenders are, as I've already said, incredibly supportive. Many of them provide us with their lending calculators, and we're often engaged with the customer before they've found the plot, never mind design the house. But you need to know how much you can borrow and how much funds, what is that budget, so you can then allocate part to land and part to build. So we're often using the lender's calculator, reviewing the client's income and outgoing position, guiding them whether they can afford to do it staying in their own home, was there a requirement to sell the home to commit to it. So yeah, there's an early stage planning. If they are going for a plot and they've found it, and it's only got outline planning, then there'll be a real detailed engagement. I mean, it's incredibly unusual for a client to be securing a plot without a vision of what they intend to build there. So they'll have a very good idea. The square meterage of the build will be important. As I said, the design, which they'll have an idea of, will be important. And there's some good principles in terms of pound per square metre that we can work towards. And the lender will work off floor plans and elevations at an early stage, which of course will be all they require rather than the full detailed drawings. But what we will be focusing on is sensible build costs and contingency. We see everything from £3,500 a square metre to people who still believe that they can build it for £700 a square metre, and I'm sorry. Our job is to protect the customer, to protect the project, to protect the lenders that we partner with. And the first place that any plans and drawings will go to is our independent build cost assessment team. They will do a cost takeoff to tell us what that house is going to cost to build. And I do appreciate, as I had friends in the building community, and I hear it often, but I still have to pay them. They still need paying. And people who are in the building industry, of course, we have many of them. Why wouldn't you self-build your own home if you have the skills to do so? So yeah, there will be an element there where they can reduce their costs of labour and some of the professional fees, but it still has to be sensible, and we do a sense check on that.
Thank you. Got a couple of other questions that I might see if Adam, if anyone else on the panel is able to answer as well. The one is about sort of local authorities and applications onto the self-build register, and how long should the local authority take to process your application?
The register's there to register. There's also custom built homes have their own register, because the legislation it doesn't just take into account the local authorities register. Other relevant information could be taken into account by way of the planning. So there are custom built homes have an extensive register as well. But the process should be keying the application on to the registration, and it's on as a registration. There is Adam, correct me if I'm incorrect, but there's a 3-year period from registration to the point where a planning permission is granted for that original registration. And remember, it's not for the person, it's for the registration. So it can be a 3-year window that you're in terms of that registration period. Yeah,
because it's obviously the register isn't about allocating specific plots, it's about allocating enough plots for the people on the register.
It's gaining an understanding of demand.
Yeah.
Because there's almost an opportunity to reverse design schemes rather than what we currently have. A volume house builder builds a house and we pick it. If the register's a group of people who are of a particular demographic or have a very strong environmental desire in terms of the design, so the scheme could be evolved around that. And so it's an effective tool. I'm sure there's many ways to improve it, but it's a very effective tool to understand demand. Yeah. And we're starting to see, Adam, you probably have a much better handle than I do, but we've already took the schemes that I mentioned there, Durham, York Council, the scheme down in London, the scheme in Glasgow. We've got councils and enabling developers, some small house builders now saying, actually, I think we'll bring the site forward as a custom build site. So they're definitely having a positive impact in terms of the number of multiple plot developments.
Yeah, we've got a sort of related question, which says a lot of councils only release land to custom build. So how likely would it be to get one for self-build? Well, I mean, that's not our direct experience. I mean, and the example that Catherine talked about, a bunker, for example, that was land that they have leased, from the council in Brighton for those self-build homes.
Yeah, the scheme in Hackney is effectively you buy a plot and you design and build your own home. The Durham scheme, the council's put in the roads and services, outline planning, and the client works with an architect to design their own home. And what's created, and I think it's really helpful to understand that a lot of the schemes will have a design code or a plot passport that comes with the planning permission. The plot passport effectively says you can't build more than 30% example of the floor area of the plot, so you don't over or underdevelop it. There's a ridge height, there's a build line, but the design code is important from a lending point of view and from a buyer's perspective, because that's the palette of materials that you can put in the outside of it. And I think that, the scheme in Stillington in York that I brought up, it's almost a conservation village, all red brick. Well, it was always going to be a restricted design palette. There was a fantastic scheme called Long 4 Acres, but it was quite the opposite. They were encouraging more entrepreneurial design from both the customer and the architect. So that was a loose design code, but the design code can bring control to the development, so you know that someone isn't building a spaceship next door to you.
Yeah. So I mean, one of the so we've got Petersfield CLT in Hampshire, and that's the route that they're going down in terms of their application. So we've got a question about the materials and the concerns from mortgage lender, particularly about materials, and whether that primarily relates to fire risk.
The materials are important. It's a complex question. And the answer's never straightforward on it. The valuers definitely have a part to play in this process, and that's about mortgageability ongoing. Fire risk will always be an important part of any construction project, but there are fire mitigation factors. And in Scotland, of course, at the west coast of Scotland and Highlands and Islands, many of them are timber frame, timber clad. Whether it's fire, whether it's mortgageability, I think there'll be some concerns, and please take this as my view. I think there'll be some concerns because it's self-build. And to put in the picture, I'm not allowed to change a light bulb in this house, so that's where my skill set is. But as a self-builder, I could be the one nailing the timber cladding to the outside of the timber frame. And if I'm not particularly good at it, I could compromise the property and compromise its value. If it's materials that need maintaining, the lender can't force you to maintain it, and if you don't maintain it, it will deteriorate and it will compromise the value of the property. So there's a number of factors around it. I think equally though, it's important to say, let's reiterate, off-site manufacturing is wholly supported. Timber frame, SIPs, ICF, oak. The palette of materials need to be considered. I'm often asked, why did I self-build my own home? Well, first of all, it was the first time that I didn't have to compromise. I got what I wanted. And if I've got 2 lenders that will support my project, that might be sufficient for me to do what I want to do, because my alternative is to compromise to get 10 lenders. I might not want to compromise, as long as I can get the support from a project. And there is, as I've already said, wide-ranging support and a number of lenders who are more flexible in terms of that palette of materials. Again, key is dealing with an expert in this area who can place you with the right lender who has an understanding of all of these factors. Yeah,
I mean, and from what you're saying, it's about, looking at all of those options sort of fairly early on, so you're not sort of closing off any avenues. And sort of when you do close off avenues, you've closed them off for a reason that, for a decision that you've made. Got a couple of questions about, and I think you mentioned a cost per square metre. And so just sort of asking for a guide in the current market. And does this include everything from the purchase of land to sort of main services and planning costs, or is that purely the actual build cost?
It should be everything encapsulated to the point that you're in the house, from the point of having your plan. You've got that cash pot. I remember I said we'll take some out for professional fees. Then we've got the build cost element. That build cost element, because of the spectrum that all of this is, will be affected by location. In parts of London, it'll probably cost you more for a bricklayer than it'll cost you for a barrister. Location's definitely got a part to play in it, and that includes shipping. It will include the choice of materials. It'll include your ability to be involved yourself or have connections. So it's a really wide spectrum. Previously, from a lending point of view, lenders get nervous if it gets below previously £1,000 a square metre. they're probably getting, you know, nervous below £1,200 a square metre. It's not to say it can't be done, but what people have to do is explain to us how they can do it.
Yeah.
It can be, of course, at the north end at 3.5. I think probably average just now won't be far away from £1,500 to £2,000 a square metre. It's probably commonplace at the moment.
Okay, but yeah, but as like you say, obviously sort of varying differences depending on the
depending on
location.
involvement.
Yeah. And then another question about whether it's better to sell the house that you own and move into a rented house to have the funds in the bank ready to go, or to stay in the house you own as long as you can.
Often that can be a personal choice thing. It's quite clearly more beneficial to transition from one home to the other where you haven't had a rent cost, which is just money down the drain. You're often putting stuff in storage, so you've got a storage cost. So there's an element of choice. Some people have to sell because they need the money that's in equity to prop up the development. So it's definitely a choice thing. And it's around affordability. It might cost you more to rent than it costs you in your current mortgage. So the affordability, you know, needs to be considered for in terms of that as well.
Yeah, I mean, and obviously you talked earlier about sort of people making the choice to kind of move in with family where they can, or actually sort of moving on to the site where they can.
Yeah, yeah,
okay.
That's all. I mean, moving on to the site's fantastic if you're in Kent or Bournemouth. It's not so clever if you're in Inverness. So
I think it would also depend on the season perhaps as well. But
absolutely.
Okay, well, thank you ever so much. That was really, really great, and again, thank you for a good question and answer session there. So we'll just take a quick 5-minute comfort break, and then we'll start again with the next speaker, Adam Broadway, at 12 o'clock. Thank you ever so much.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you very much for this opportunity to give you more of an overview of kind of the wider subject around kind of custom and self-build. We've heard two excellent speakers earlier giving some really good practical advice. I'm going to come at it a slightly different way round, as in this is trying to kind of set kind of the context for the subject, and to kind of give you some kind of policy frameworks supported then around some kind of particular topic areas around things like tenures and affordability. So I'm conscious it's a long morning, so I will try and zoom through these reasonably well, and there's obviously been a good level of questions, etc. So please use those facilities to ask your questions, etc. And if we can't answer them direct, we'll pick them up later on. So just a quick summary of the agenda on the slide there. If we move on, and just to give you a little bit of background, my background is actually affordable housing. I've come from the affordable housing association sector, and about 10 or 12 years ago I got involved with the subjects around sustainability, and I will explain one of the projects I got involved with in Cambridge as part of the kind of presentation. But we move on. The Right to Build task force, of which I'm one of the expert members, is a really important kind of tool for you, for anybody thinking about looking at the subject matter, and particularly local authorities, developers, councillors, etc. If you're looking for kind of more detailed advice, then this is probably a really good route to try and source that information for you. So the Right to Build task force was set up a few years ago, primarily to do that. It was to promote and to encourage the delivery of more custom and self-build across the UK. And what it does, it has a very small team which was funded from various sources, government and the nationwide. And we have a panel of experts who come from a variety, again, of different expertise, either developers, planners, lots of planners, architects, and there's a couple of people and myself and a guy called Phil who look at kind of affordability and the housing association kind of sectors as well. So an immediate plug would be that if you have any detailed commissions or pieces of work that you'd like looking at, then this is probably a good way to do. So my presentation is coming from myself and my company Instinctively Green, and kind of from the task force. So moving on, the signposting here confirms if you want to get involved or get some case study information, we have a series of kind of good practice planning guidance, and we have some advice notes, etc., on the website, and you'll see the link there, which again we're sure we can share with you. It's righttobuild.org.uk. So if we move on, so where are we in the subject matter? And I think it's been alluded that, you know, that we're in a kind of, I would say, a transformational piece at the moment, and there's been a lot of work done in the background over the last few years about the promotion of custom and self-build. And I think it's fair to say that we've probably got it in a position where it is now becoming embedded in the government's thinking in terms of its housing and planning policy. So we've had a series of things over the last few years, and which have kind of helped set out that kind of journey plan, and the government have kind of set out their own kind of action plan about kind of moving the subject forward. So we've seen legislation review, we've seen legislation, we've seen the Help to Build piece. We had a review by an MP, and the Bacon review, which I'll come on to. We've seen the Right to Build task force set up, etc. We've got data, much more data around the interest and registration of people's interest in wanting to do custom self-build, etc., etc. And I think what we're seeing is that, I say, it's now becoming much more embedded in government thinking and therefore policy decision making as we move forward. Next slide. I think one of the key things we need to start with is this kind of unpacking a little bit the kind of custom self-build kind of definition. Because it is interesting in the sense that we have self-build, and I think a lot of the conversation probably in this presentation today has been around self-build, and that's really where people are taking very much a direct involvement in the project. They're doing a lot of the work themselves, not just design, but also the construction. And that can be, you know, elements that could be kind of kitchen fittings, or as we heard earlier, you know, actual completely building a home yourself. And I would say that actually, in terms of this isn't the main activity in the wider definition of custom and self-build. There's a lot more activity going on, and there's some really good examples out there. But actually what was also happening is there's a lot more of what we call custom build, where people commission somebody to do something for them. So the builder and the specialist comes like an enabler to deliver homes, but the homes are designed, and the contribution in terms of what goes in it, etc., comes from the customer. And that can be the individual, or we'll move on to in a bit, kind of groups coming together. And I think it's important to understand that this is the subject matter we're covering. So both are relevant, and crucially, in terms of legislation, both are relevant. So actually, groups may come to you as an authority or a parish, for example, and they may want to just commission the development rather than taking a very active role in self-build, but both are relevant. So why? And I think the important thing here is there are some key themes and threads in the debate. The first of all is that there's definitely an increase in demand in people wanting to do something different. People, if they have the ability or just the desire, are beginning to say, and I think there was a Mori poll which confirmed that actually, if you had a choice, you'd want to do something yourself rather than just take a bespoke kind of Dorchester house type from a national house builder. And there is growing evidence that more and more people want to customize or get involved in the development of their own home or their community. And affordability is critical. We've seen significant price rises in the property market. So access to a quality home, or a home that you desire and actual probably even need, can in many cases become unaffordable. So the route of customer self-build is one way of addressing your own individual affordability issue. And as I say, households, individuals, families, etc. Besides putting a roof over your head, actually there are often quite simple things that you want in your property, which again a spec house type or property often doesn't provide you with. So this again is an opportunity for you to design something which actually meets your needs. I don't know a single group or project in this, if I call it a sector, where sustainability isn't embedded in it. And that comes from primarily people wanting to produce something which has very low carbon impact or neutral carbon impact, but very regularly it's about long-term sustainability of the place and the product, so less maintenance, but more importantly around kind of energy and water kind of consumption reduction, and cost management. And I would say there is also a growing interest across the UK and about taking the subject matter but doing it as a group and doing it as a community. And the picture on the right there, that's a little bit out of focus, is the Marmalade Lane scheme, which I'll refer to in a bit. A few facts. I think these actually need to be updated soon, but in 2016 we had about 13,000 homes in the sector built, 5% year-on-year growth. That growth continues. As I said earlier, a survey, Ipsos survey it was, said that 67% of buyers would prefer not or unlikely to buy a volume house from a house builder. And 30% of the costs, and colleagues may just want to review this, but usually about 30% of the cost of the end value of the home goes into the plot. What we are again have evidence of is that on completion, your value can go up to on average about 30%. More and more SME builders, though we've obviously had a significant decline in the number of smaller, medium-sized builders over the last 10-20 years, but more and more of them want to actually get involved in this subject area and see the benefits of doing it. And I think there's probably about 30 specialists in the sector at the moment, and that continues to kind of grow as we move forward. Next slide, please. I think the key things in this slide, in terms of kind of the policy drivers, is that the first slide on the left, top left, shows you the amount of custom and self-build across the kind of predominantly Europe, but you can see they've got on New Zealand and Australia in there as well. So the UK, the little red blob on the right, shows you the amount of when you look at the number of homes built in annually, then the percentage of customer self-build is significantly low. It's well less than about, I think the latest figure is about 7 to 8%. Whereas you say in Germany, Italy, Austria, you know, it's significantly the majority of provision. And I think what we've learned is that actually customer self-build is a really good way of providing new accommodation. I know we have a housing crisis. We have, you know, a property price crisis as well, caused for a whole series of issues. But this is again a really important product type which actually should be supported, and I've alluded to that. That is where we're on the trend. If we go to the next slide, please. And I think this for me was one of the key things, is that this graph here is what's trying to show is kind of house building, number of homes completed since the kind of just end of the kind of mid-50s right up to kind of 19. And the main blue bar is the private, it's called enterprise on this slide, but kind of house builders, you know. And what we've seen is traditionally that they turn over around about 100 to 200,000 homes a year, and that's their kind of business model. And I'm sure it's been expressed before, you know, that house builders will control the supply and delivery of homes, because what they're doing is managing prices, etc. Whereas the grey area was, as we can appreciate it historically, was the massive council house building, and that in up to the kind of end of the 70s was enabled us to kind of build, you know, 300 plus thousand homes a year, which actually enabled us to kind of meet the housing demand at the time. But kind of as we went into the 80s, where we saw significant decline in council built house building, the right to buy policy kicking in, etc., we've taken out of the market a major supply of houses across the UK, which in the end has, I believe strongly, has therefore resulted in significant housing crisis, but significant house price increases, which has also compounded the situation. And that's why, again, we think that the custom self-build market and product is a really important policy tool to enable us to start to have some influence and to increase the delivery of a range of new homes for people in need. Next slide. So what are the benefits of custom self-build? So on this slide, I'm trying to summarize kind of 3 areas. So for communities, I think what we're talking about is, again, a wider choice, the opportunity to help around affordability. And there are really good examples now of the benefits of kind of custom self-build community-led housing initiatives around kind of issues around community cohesion and the lesser impact those communities have on the state in terms of health provision, social care, etc. There's some really interesting information starting to emerge, and I think there are a number of kind of research projects helping to confirm that assumption. And there's also, again, for a community, is the beauty of the diversity. Again, that gets quite subjective, but again, we think that is again a good benefit. But because the group and the individuals have been right at the heart of that kind of planning process. For a council, what we again suggest is that it can help accelerate and grow housing supply, offers more choice, often better quality. It can, the key point is that it can help support the local economy by helping to support local builders, local supply chains, etc. It's also an opportunity, which is for all groups, is around kind of the opportunity for modular and more sustainable construction. And there is growing evidence that actually, if promoted correctly and within policy, then there are actually fewer planning objections for these type of initiatives. For the land builder and owner, more business opportunities, wider market. You can actually accelerate build out by having clients already invested in the project from the early stages. It can actually improve the marketability because it offers wider choice, a wider offer. And if it, on some cases, it obviously offers the opportunity to share risk if you work with a specialist provider. And as we heard earlier, it's really important around viability and kind of cash flow. Thank you. Next slide. So for the council colleagues who are on the call, you're very familiar, but there are 2 key duties on the council. Firstly, set out in the 2015 Act and supplemented around the 2016. And in principle, what it's saying is that in the 15 Act, you are required to keep and publicise a register, and you also need to consider and have regard for that register when promoting and exercising planning, housing policy, etc. But 2016 put much more of a duty on the councils to meet that demand. So actually, in granting permissions, there's a duty on the council to actually consider your demand, local demand, to the register, and encouraging the provision of service plots or plots which actually could be used for kind of customer self-build. Thank you. So, in terms of the policy stuff, the other I alluded to at the beginning is that the gentleman in the middle about to cut a rope, I believe, or a piece of string, is Richard Bacon. And Richard Bacon MP over in Norfolk has been a really fundamental champion of the sector and the topic. And he's been was commissioned recently to do a kind of review of kind of where we're at and how do we kind of move the debate going forward, which again, I think, to be fair to government, reflects their recognition that it's an important sector to be promoted. So what very quickly he came up with 6 points. The first was to engage Homes England, but more importantly, not just to engage with them, but actually for them to have their own customer self-build delivery unit. He promoted the idea, which is actually being considered at the moment, is about having a kind of show park. Colleagues who may be familiar with Scandinavia, the Scandinavians regularly have, I think, in some countries, an annual, if not a biannual, kind of display thing, bit like the kind of thing you get in Olympia, you know, kind of open session around kind of new products and new house types. So a show park around custom self-build is promoted. Support for community-led housing, which I'm a huge advocate for, and also to promote green homes and advanced manufacturing. So again, trying to ensure that there are more product types coming out which are very highly sustainable. Continued support for planning reform, though obviously we've got the kind of Gove issue at the moment with that being delayed, pushed back, whatever. But also there was a recognition that we need to get into some of the minutiae around kind of tax issues and kind of resolving, ironing some of those out. So at this point, I'll just pause quickly to see if there's any immediate question, and it allows me to have a quick drink as I'm trying to get over COVID at the moment.
Hello. Yes, we have had one question, which is really about how you can encourage your local authority to support self and custom build, particularly where they've got a current local plan that doesn't have policy specifically around self and custom build.
Really good question. So I think events like this are brilliant. You know, holding sessions which allow people to engage, ask questions. So I would do that. A lot of promotion. One of our partner authorities, Cambridge, did a lot of kind of promotional work. So they had a dedicated officer whose role was to really get out and meet lots of people and to take the message out there. Now that's not always easy in a local authority, but certainly the kind of active promotion of it, holding events, raising the debate, I think is really kind of key to enabling more people to understand the issues and the benefits of what we're trying to achieve.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, and there's a similar question about, you know, where their local authority is building homes, but are not, you know, are not supporting self-build. And again, it's about that sort of, you know, promotion, raising awareness of the issue, or perhaps, you know, engaging with your sort of local councillors and sort of raising that issue up the agenda.
Absolutely. I think it's about awareness. As my slide earlier on showed, you know, we're not, it's not at the forefront of housing delivery in the UK at the moment, but that shouldn't be a barrier to it. It's explaining what are the benefits and what are the issues that go with it, and getting those out with decision makers, and using kind of case studies signposting to people where there's been successes, etc., and people can ask questions around the detail. I think, you know, so that awareness is critical to this to move it forward.
So there's another question about, you know, once you're on the register, how do you access any local authority plots that are made available?
I'd have to defer to the particular local authority. Obviously, if the local authority has got a register and there's a link person, my understanding is that the individuals should communicate directly with them. One of the challenges is going to be is does the local authority actually have land? Significant number of local authorities don't have any more land, so then I'm afraid it will be a signposting to other, you know, private sector opportunities that come up. So I'm afraid there isn't a template for it, but I would certainly, if the individual's looking to do it, is to obviously make the contact with the local authority and to pursue it that way.
Are you happy to keep taking questions for a little while, or do you?
Should we move on?
Yep.
Anything urgent? So so there are two or three kind of, there were about three actually, kind of specific areas that you wanted to have a look at. I understood. So kind of tenure and affordability is a regular one. So if we can explore that in just very quickly. So next point. And to answer it, this isn't a flippant answer, but it's just the reality is that there are significant different ways of delivering customer self-build, and there are numerous examples, from single detached plots, which we're probably very familiar with, smaller homes on small plots, large family homes on large plots, large infill, regeneration, terrace properties, apartments, etc. So actually, we're getting a really good portfolio of different kind of house types and solutions under this kind of subject matter. And so therefore, I think that's really encouraging. So, but then how do you deliver them? So what we're also seeing is a range of, so you get the individual self-builder who would either self-build or commission. We've had a brilliant example this morning from a community land trust. There are significant numbers of new community land trusts being set up. We're also seeing an increase in groups coming together in collectives and under the kind of co-housing project banner. We're also seeing in a number of cases more service and self-build plots on smaller, larger sites, driven no doubt by local authorities understanding the debate and requiring developers to provide such facilities on their new developments. And we're also seeing kind of custom build on kind of larger housing sites out of the desire of the developer. And we're seeing commercial house custom builders coming to the market, finding sites, promoting them, etc. And then we've got to kind of self-finish homes, some examples of start homes, a little bit dubious, but we need to watch this space with the new first homes initiatives. And all of this, we have a variety of kind of different affordable, and that's an affordable with the kind of the small A, because it's not just ton of tenure. So we're seeing a whole range of different ways of actually delivering this. And what I would say is that if you're looking at this and want to meet the wider issue, which is around kind of affordable housing with a capital A, i.e. rented or shared ownership as kind of product types, then again we're getting a really good range of kind of initiatives. Community land trusts, as said, there are examples of developers and housing associations looking at kind of discounted market sale models. Shared ownership is again, there are a number of really good examples of that. We are seeing some emerging affordable and social rented schemes, either as on their own or as part of kind of larger developments, which are custom and self-build, where tenants actively engage early in the kind of process. And we're seeing a number of these being delivered on kind of exception sites, either as part of the affordable mix, or again on some larger sites where the developer has a planning requirement to deliver custom self-build. And then there are some examples now of kind of council-enabled affordable housing schemes. It's too short a session to be able to give you lots of signposting, but again, we can signpost you to that. And a very poor slide, bear in mind what we just presented, but a really good example, as you've just heard earlier today, on a CLT delivering a rural exception site. So well done to colleagues who are involved with that. So my point here is that there are a range of schemes which are doing not just custom self-build, but they're addressing the affordability, whether it's affordable in the ability to buy, or whether it's affordable in the end product, it's rented or shared ownership. Is definitely, we've got some really good case studies, and here's another really good one where the local authority, Bristol, actually helped to set up a CLT on a former school site, and they've been able to deliver a mixed tenant scheme of affordable rent and shared ownership of 12 properties. And so that was again where a local authority was taking the initiative. They had the site, and they were keen to kind of promote that, and that's been very successful. So moving on to kind of sustainability and MMC. As I said earlier, I really don't know, and I'd be fascinated to hear anybody who's looked at custom self-build and sustainability is not within the kind of ethos values of the project. So what I would say here is that there are probably three typical drivers. On the environmental side, the main drivers are, again, people responding to the carbon agenda, looking at kind of modern forms of energy production to reduce costs, but also to lower CO2. There are some fantastic examples of people going off grid because of that requirement of their brief. And also there's, again, growing interest in people wanting to have products and materials which are eco-friendly, environmentally friendly, etc. But it's also important to kind of get the social side. And we'll come on to it in a little bit, but there are significant benefits around sharing tools, experience, knowledge, people, skills, etc. Really important. Health, what better place to be in a community where you've got carers around you that can provide support. I don't mean necessarily doctors and nurses, but people who can look after you if you're not feeling particularly well, or you're isolating, as a number of people no doubt have had to do recently. Resilience, and there's growing research, and I think showing that actually that people want resilience, need resilience, and they're looking to achieve it through kind of working together and by sharing kind of skills, etc. And then there's fuel security. My word, what a week we've had over the last 10 days. We're watching the kind of gas debate and how that's panning out. And again, a key point. Economically, lower running costs, affordability in terms of capital, longer term value, all kind of key parts of the kind of sustainability drive. Excuse me. In terms of kind of MMC, I've just kind of tried to pick out a few kind of subheadings. I'm sure again the colleagues and people on the call who have experience of some of these, but just to keep, again, you have the kind of volumetric, kind of built in a factory, delivered to site, so kind of top left. You have kind of closed panels, which are basically are predominantly timber, where they are made again in a factory, or could be built on site, but mainly in the factory, delivered on site, erected. And then you get a site assembly, which can be a mixture of closed paneled or built on site. And then you get kind of site-based construction where kind of everything is done on site from scratch. And so what we're seeing is that there are a variety of different manufacturers, product producers out there doing all of this. And again, most of those are coming at it with sustainable products again, trying to kind of meet the sustainability criteria. So in terms of delivery, next slide. One of the questions we get regularly asked is, how do you manage it effectively? And that comes from local authorities wanting to make sure that, you know, in granting a planning permission, that the property is then not put on Rightmove the next day and sold for a significant increase in value. But also from, you know, developers who just again want to make sure that you know, that the value is kind of retained in the kind of initiative. So the classic stuff are use of planning conditions, and particularly Section 106 obligations. You know, so legally binding requirements on the developer or the landowner to deliver a scheme are probably the key things to look at. And I think the key thing here is that it's important to be realistic in setting those requirements out, but also not making them too onerous that you put the development at risk or stop it. And they will clearly depend on the site itself and the degree of control needed. What we are seeing is that on a kind of slightly larger scale is that in some local authorities, they're using local development orders again, or land agreements, in fact, to control the kind of end use and on the development itself. And not all of these controls need to be imposed by the local authority. So it's quite a complex site, complex area to kind of get into in a short presentation. But to give you confidence is that, again, there are some really good examples out there. It was mentioned again on the call earlier that, well, again, one of the ways to control things is to use things like plot passports in using the Dutch model, and this was used at Graven Hill, which was explained earlier, where you have kind of certain site criteria set out, and then the rest of it is really kind of left to you to bring your scheme forward as long as you meet those kind of key criteria. This is a long slide. I won't go into the detail, but you'll get slides at the end. But again, there's a range of ways of controlling things, say through kind of planning obligations, planning conditions, etc. You can also use things towards the bottom here about kind of implementation and monitoring and statements. Health and safety rules can also be used to control things like, you know, site access and things like that. There's quite a lot of detail in here, but again, all of these kind of fall very neatly into kind of a toolbox that, you know, people can use relevant to the particular scheme that's being promoted or being considered. I've said again that there are lots of examples. I picked two at this point, and again, I refer you to the kind of the Right to Build Toolkit website, which has got case studies on it. If you're not familiar with large scale custom self-build, then Graven Hill at Bicester is the place to go in the UK. It's the largest custom self-build scheme at the moment, about 1,500 properties, well under construction, a whole variety of different delivery models, etc. Lots of lessons being learned about how you kind of promote that, but that was promoted by a local authority who bought an MOD site, set up a delivery vehicle, put in most of the infrastructure, and then have been marketing the individual plots and areas. And for those who love watching Grand Design, one of the Grand Designs actually featured, I think it's 10 homes which were directly self-built on that site. Good, well worth a watch on YouTube. And then another one, which is probably a little bit more of interest, is Shropshire has adopted an exceptions policy, which allows the promotion and delivery of kind of custom self-build. And it's a really good example of trying to, again, control the delivery of the product, making sure it does what it's intended to do, but also helps to address the kind of affordability in an area of kind of housing shortage and kind of high house prices. So there's growing emergence about kind of policy stuff which is being used to kind of help promote the delivery. I'd be wrong not to do it, but this is probably where I get most excited around the subject matter, is about community-led housing. Next slide, please. There are two really good examples of many in the UK. The first one that is well worth again looking up if you're interested in community-led housing is the Ouch scheme in High Barnet, which is again a senior housing project for flats for older women. Most of them are owner occupied, and but importantly, there is some social rented accommodation in the scheme. And so this is again where a community came together, set the brief, and delivered a fantastic scheme, and which I think is a really tremendous example. And then the next slide, the scheme which I helped to set up and commission was the Marmalade Lane scheme in Cambridge, which was Cambridge's first co-housing project. So this was a city council site, and through about 3 or 4 years work of getting a group together, we managed to deliver this scheme of 42 highly sustainable homes in partnership with Town and Tristlehus. And I'm delighted to say that primarily for its architecture and its community cohesion is now kind of recognised as one of the UK's best examples of co-housing, and is thriving as a community. And I will end by saying that both those two schemes, one of the really important things that I was delighted see it win was a kind of excellence in kind of planning for health and well-being. And I suppose this is kind of one of the big messages I would say, whether it's a kind of individual plot, custom self-build or whatever, or it is a large-scale community and initiative, I think what we need to recognize is the not only the economic benefits of doing this to the individuals and the community, but also the health and well-being that come out of it. There is again growing evidence that communities which kind of commission and work together are having significant benefits in terms of health. So the Ouch scheme, the health life expectancy of the residents has significantly increased. And if you look at the picture here, you know, where better place in the common house is where you can safely put your children, knowing that all your neighbours will be looking after them. And as an older person, then you've got people who will look after you. And there's growing evidence that those type of communities which enable people to create that space and that community together are having a less burden on the state in terms of other communities. Okay, I think I'll end there. I need a quick drink, but happy to answer any questions that you have.
Thank you ever so much, Adam. Really appreciate the sort of diverse range of topics that you covered there and sort of pulling all of the strings together. So thank you ever so much for that. I've got a few questions. The first one, what kind of funding, if any, is available to support sustainable builds?
That's a really good question. In terms of the product, excuse me, well, we just had yesterday, didn't we, that the government have put a little kind of toe in the water for money for kind of air source heat pumps or pumps, ground source included as well. So that is a bonus as of next April. I think I would spin it round and say, actually, if you think about what goes into a property, if you design it and use materials which are sustainable from sustainable sources, etc., you can still produce the property if it's well designed and well managed at very similar cost to which it would cost in a normal development. And now I will get challenged on that, because if you go to passive house, there's going to be an uplift. But if you take the fabric first approach, then actually there's nothing really out there to stop, you know, the materials that go into your home being of sustainable materials and not costing you more. It is a question of getting the right advice, but it can be done. And I'm sure colleagues who've done self-build and, you know, Hugo, I'm sure, you know, you got some really good examples for your scheme. but it can be done. But it does what's the key thing is the process to go into it. You have to, and I think Tom alluded to it as well about cash flow, do the stuff first and get it thought through and designed, and that way you will then start to find ways of kind of delivering your ambition, but at an affordable budget.
Thank you. And we've got a question about the Brownfield Land Release Fund and how this will operate for self and custom build.
That's okay, so I'm probably a little bit out of the loop because I haven't heard the results of the fund's announcement, because I think there was a bidding process over the summer which allowed local authorities to bring forward schemes, etc. And I must admit, I've lost track as to whether there's been a formal announcement, but the initiative was for local authorities to have sites and to bring them forward and to use the fund to enable the additional costs required to bring that site into a custom self-build would be supported by the fund. So apologies if I can't answer that directly, but we can take it away and find out where we're at.
Thank you. Got a question about the specialist small and medium enterprise builders in the UK, and if there is somewhere where there's a sort of where they're grouped together, where there's a list.
Probably NAXPO is probably one of the best sources, which is the kind of trade body for custom and self-build, primarily around kind of product types and things like that. But they have their kind of show home down in Swindon, and a number of the developers, smaller house builders, etc., who are interested in the subject will be linked to them in some form. I can't quite recall whether they've got a list, and obviously the data protection stuff, etc. But NAXPO will be my first call, and also you've got Tom here, who no doubt has got they are funding a lot of those individual companies and businesses, and I'm sure that there may well be again some contacts and lists that Buildstore might be able to be assist with.
Yeah, so they'd certainly be good people to contact, and also in terms of your specific area as well. And
yeah.
So next question, quite a broad one. So you mentioned at the beginning, I think one of your first slides, about ironing out tax issues. The question is, what are those tax issues?
Crikey. Well, I'm not a tax expert, but I understand that you get some vagaries around things like VAT and things like that around kind of products and kind of building issues. So it's not a specialist area, but there are my understanding, the reason Richard Bacon picked it up is that there are some disincentives at the moment which kind of hinder those who want to do custom self-build, and it's around those kind of tax issues. And I think there might be some issues around personal tax as well, but I'm afraid I'm not the expert to it. Do ask the Right to Build task force directly if that's something you specifically need advice on, unless again Tom may well have the answer up his sleeve.
Thank you. And then a couple of questions again, sort of similar to earlier, about the sort of variation in enthusiasm between different planning local authorities about self and custom build, and what the options are there, and obviously that may be a disincentive for people to join the self and custom build register. And I guess that's again about sort of raising the profile of that issue locally, with your councillors, with your local community, and trying to sort of bring that up the agenda locally.
Yeah, I think it's there is a mismatch, I have to say, kind of patchwork across the country about local authorities' approaches and attitudes to the subject. I think that's probably just normal. That's no doubt a result of local authorities under huge resourcing pressures. Depends on their location, what other pressures are they under in terms of land supply, etc. And one of the big debates that does quite regularly come up with is that when you look at an opportunity, what do? Do you deliver custom self-build, or do you prefer deliver an affordable house for rent? And I think that is a really big topic, which is There's no easy answer to that. I suppose you could say, well, provide the affordable rented home, but allow some kind of customization and etc. And then you're doing both. But that gets into quite complex territory. But I think it is a varied picture. So it goes back to the point about sessions like this, is trying to raise awareness, provide really good examples and being able to signpost people to projects which are successful. And I think that over time will then change people's opinions to the subject, and then we'll see an increase again in the supply.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, it's certainly a question that we're having a conversation that we're having amongst the community-led housing hubs, in terms of, developments that can be self-build, can also be community-led, can also be affordable. Yeah. And as the sort of models develop, that you're sort of, be able to pick different options as a self-build scheme, but that is also, picks up on these other elements as well. So
just to add to that, I think one of the key things, I think I didn't show it, but there was quite a lot of work done by a local a community which was writing its neighbourhood plan, and as a result of that, it identified a whole series of kind of new possible sites for delivery in a village, of which a number of those then went to customer self-build. My point being, I think community engagement at a local level is really important, because actually that community then is the driver for it. And if they as communities say, actually we actually want to deliver a customer self-build because we can see the merits in it for whatever, then actually that's a really good and powerful way of moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, that, and again, I mentioned them before, but that's a similar example with the Petersfield Community Land Trust. And that was where the self-build sites were allocated through the Petersfield Neighbourhood Plan. Yeah. And then the CLT came together as the vehicle to deliver those schemes. And that's something that sort of fairly recently went into planning.
Yeah, great.
But yeah, like you say, that's an example of people coming together themselves to identify the homes that are needed, as with all types of community-led housing. So we've got one more question. So it's just, so it says, that's quite a wide question. What changes in legislation are expected?
Ooh.
So,
well,
that's perhaps around the Bacon report.
Yeah, so I think I think the issue has come up is basically with the whole debate around planning reform. There was an ideal opportunity to embed customer self-build in that reform, but with the change of kind of minister and the kind of pushing it all into a siding has meant that while planning reform is now parked, then I think we have a bit of a kind of legislative vacuum. Coming as a planner, then what is really important is that the policy and guidance, legislation, policy and guidance is very, very important. And what we can say though is that the work that's been done in the past on getting to where we are, and having had the Bacon review, I think just really confirmed that the government, and I think even the opposition, understand that there are real benefits in diversifying the housing supply sector, because not only does the diversification help for all the reasons we've talked about earlier, but also it increases supply. And so I think it's going to happen. The difficulty is we don't have that opportunity at this point to be able to kind of continue to lobby and get it embedded in government policy.
Yeah, I mean, it's a sort of issue of getting everything joined up so that the sort of initiatives are sort of matched by sort of policies within the national planning policy framework, and so it's sort of clear. Yeah, there's a sort of joined up direction of travel, as it were, and then obviously that sort of filters down into local authority planning policies.
Yeah.
I think that's the end of our questions. So thank you ever so much, Adam, and thank you everyone for attending today. Thank you all for your questions, and thank you ever so much to our speakers for joining us. It's been a really excellent morning, and I hope everyone's really gained some great information from it. Just a quick update from us at Hampshire Homes Hub. So we are here to help communities to deliver community-led housing, including group self and custom build, and please do get in touch with us if you've got an idea or a project that you want to discuss. We will be emailing a short feedback form, and we'd be really grateful if you could fill that in, and that will help us to plan future events. There'll also be an option on that form to indicate if you're interested in becoming part of a group, and we will then look to match you with other people within the same area. We're also launching our guide to group self and custom build this week, and we will send a link to that out with the email as well. So yeah, thank you ever so much to everyone. I've just noticed that Hugo's got his hand up. If you want to
Yeah, I just wanted
oh, sorry, yes.
Yeah, I just wanted to respond to that question earlier. So it's just to clarify, our rent is 850 a month. And then the percentage of that goes to equity is really low. It's about 1%. So it's quite a slow process to earn your percentage. And the build cost, the project cost about 1 million in total, which is about 160,000 per house. So just there you go, just to put you on there.
Thank you ever so much, Hugo. Really appreciate that. Thank you. I'd forgotten we were going to pick those up again.
That's all right. Anything else, please get in touch.
No, yeah. So thank you ever so much, everyone, and thank you very much for attending.